Hello students, welcome to yet another in a series of video lectures. Today we're going to be talking about treatment groups, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk about specialized treatment methods at this point. So, as always, we encourage you to read, to come to class prepared, to discuss these different methodologies that we're going to talk about today as it relates to specialized methods when we're looking at treatment groups. Alrighty. So we're going to spend some time today talking about these specialized methods, looking at intervening with group members, intervening in the group as a whole, and then changing the group environment. So some similar themes to what we've talked about previously, but just in a little bit more depth and a little bit more detail. That's specifically looking at working with treatment types of groups. So when we talk about specialized methods for group members, we have to look at it in these different realms. And so the first area that we're going to tackle is the intrapersonal review, or the interpersonal focus, in terms of really looking at how members' cognition, affect, thoughts, beliefs, and values, and sensations and emotions. So when you think about intrapersonal, think about it as I guess a good metaphor would be things that happen inside of you. So as people are struggling with active thought disorders or different social phobias, things of that particular nature, then treatment groups can be very effective when you're looking at these specialized methods. So some of the changes that you'd be wanting to see with the actual group members would be to be able to recognize and identify and discriminate the difference between thoughts, feelings, behaviors. To recognize how these associations play off each other, and then to actually analyze the rationality of those thoughts and beliefs, and then to actually look at changing the ones that are irrational and moving forward. So again, looking at how the person sees the world from their own perspective. So what's happening inside of that person. So looking at those group members and looking at these issues are what's going to be helpful in a treatment group setting that's working with folks who've got some struggles with these particular types of situations. So again, thinking about those. When we're looking at group members, we're also looking at the interpersonal, which then goes a little bit broader. So when you think about interpersonal, think about how people relate to other people. So when we're thinking about these types of situations, we're looking outside of the scope of how that person visualizes the world, but how they actually interact and interface in those different set of circumstances. So again, we want to look at things in the group setting that will help us in terms of changing some of that behavior, helping them learn how to change that behavior. And some of it could be done by things as simple as observational learning. So really paying attention to those types of situations that come about as we were talking about the observational things. So in other words, we could do some role modeling, or role playing rather, which is something that you all have done in a lot of your classes and group settings. And basically, you can use role playing to assess, to simulate, to help increase the understanding and decision making and overall behavior of that person. And some of the different types of role plays that are helpful are role reversals. We can do what we call psychodramas or monodramas, soliloquies. And if you look in your book on pages 310, it gives you some breakdown of what some of those particular role plays may look like as you try to engage them. Then the observational learning really looks at helping the members understand their own attention to awareness of observer. They also have recognized, and research has proven, that folks learn vicariously by watching other people. So directly watching and repeating and practicing new behaviors until they've got it down packed is one methodology that you could actually utilize in a group setting that could be very helpful in terms of moving those group members forward in terms of the goals that they need to accomplish. Also, when we're looking at group members, we're looking at the environment. And so if you think about micro, meso, macro, think about the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, and then the environment is kind of on the same scope, because what you're looking at now is you're trying to modify the psychosocial and physical space of group members. And so you're wanting to connect people to actual real resources when there's a need, as well as you're looking at things like expanding folks' social networks, as well as modifying their environment. And so when we're looking at connecting folks to real services, let's say that you've got a group that you're running that caters to adults with developmental disabilities, then we know that there are going to be some concrete services that agencies will need to actually employ if we're going to look at improving the functionality of members of that particular group. So it could be job sharing. We could be looking at things like transportation to different places, or support groups for families. Might be some resources that you would actually enlist, and these are concrete resources that you would connect these particular members to. Expanding social networks. Oftentimes you'll have group situations where folks will be struggling with the loss of a social network or how to rebuild that. And so simple tools like a social network chart that really helps members see who's all in their network and what kind of relationships are there and how can they expand on those particular relationships, and be very deliberate about how those things actually work. And then finally, modifying the physical environments. And so an example might be if you're working with a group that has a focus on weight loss, then one of the things that we can think about in terms of modifying the environment is that if how successful are people who are wanting to lose weight going to be if their home environment, their refrigerator is stocked full of food or unnutritious snacks or things of that particular nature. So one way to look at imposing some change or to direct some change might be to actually physically change that environment and what it looks like, and maybe taking some of those actual items out. So these are just some specialized methods that really will help you think about if you find yourself in a situation where you're running treatment groups to move forward. When we're thinking about the group as a whole, we want to think about things that we've always thought about when we're in a group, and being cognizant of the changing communication and interactional patterns, who's talking, who's not, what can you do to enhance that, changing the group's attractions for its members, so making it appealing, making sure that folks are respected and are treated in such a way that they can feel comfortable sharing and being in a safe environment. Using those social integration dynamics effectively in terms of looking at what's there and making sure that we're integrating those things. Really looking at what are some of the norms in terms of how the group functions, the hierarchy, some of the roles and so forth, and making sure that they are used in such a way that they are effective in terms of helping the group get to where it needs to go. As well as looking at whether there needs to be a change in group culture. Sometimes leaders or co-facilitators have to change their particular methodology of how they approach certain situations as it relates to group culture if they're not getting the results that they contracted for initially on in the process. So something to keep in mind as it relates to those things. Also wanting to take a look at the group environment, looking at most of the time social workers are doing these types of treatment groups in the context of an agency. So making sure that the agency understands the importance of and the benefits of this group process. So making sure that you're doing everything as a leader to ensure that the agency supports are there, that there's adequate funding, that there are supplies, that there's proper logistics and planning as it relates to the environment, linking folks with those interagency networks, so making sure that there are clear connections between the needs of your client, and others in the agency, as well as increasing the community awareness in terms of letting people know that those particular groups are there and that they exist, and that they can be a benefit to the greater community. So as we think about moving forward with these specialized treatment groups, and some of you may find yourselves in situations where your particular placement may actually have you running some groups of this particular nature. So you'll want to make sure that you review this particular chapter, review some of the techniques that we've talked about, and try to implement them as often as you can. So again, as always, we wish you well, and continue to do your readings and come to class prepared. Thank you.